Once again, on a beautiful Sunday evening, here we are on TildeTalks, a tech video podcast series by the techies for the techies, where India's smartest techie will be asked some of the deepest questions. In this episode, we'll be discussing web development from the developer's perspective, in which you can get the answers of what rules are there in the web development project, what are all the industry trends, how should anyone start learning web development, what career opportunities are there in this domain, and a lot more. So get ready with a pen and paper to take notes, especially if you are taking web development as your career. As usual, we have prepared a lot of questions for our guest. And if you have any questions for us in web development, you can comment below. We'll definitely take up your questions. To answer all your questions and give a lot of information in web development, we have our guest, Mr. Gaurav Paul, the full
Hello.
stack web application developer. Hi, Gaurav. Welcome to our show.
Hi, Pranav. Thanks a lot for having me. Excited to be here.
You can briefly introduce yourself to all our viewers.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So, as Pranav has introduced me, so I have been working in the web development space for the last 6 years now. I have been working in different domains like education, marketing, finance, and currently I am employed by D. Shaw. I work on applications, corporate applications for workflows, task management, discussions, and these kind of things. And it has been a great pleasure working with the web platform and seeing it evolve over the last couple of years. And I am excited and looking forward to this discussion. And thanks a lot once again, Pranav, for having me here.
Great. So, web development as a career. So, how
Mhm.
did you choose being a developer?
So, Pranav, my first exposure to web development was not web development as such. The web itself was when I was in school and I got introduced to the Yahoo Mail application for the first time. And at the time, I didn't have my own personal computer, and I went to a cyber cafe, and like my sister sat with me and introduced me to this whole concept of email. And what was very interesting for me is like we could go to any cafes around us, and we could open a browser, and this interactive application with numerous capabilities was just available to us. We didn't have to install anything. We didn't have to like spend a lot of time configuring things. So until that point, my perception was very much that the internet thing was for people who were techies or for people who were really really smart. And that was the first time I got to see firsthand like how simple and how easy was it to use an internet application. And the next obvious question was, if I want to build something like this, then like what is the best way to do it? And so from that point forward, I started exploring like how web applications are made, what technologies are involved, and what kind of courses you have to take. So and it went forward from there.
Okay, what are all the technologies available? Let's start from the point where you started itself. So, what are all the technologies available? How do anyone start their career in this particular web development?
Mhm. So when we talk about web applications as such, we typically have a backend server, so which is an application which is managed and maintained for you by someone, and that someone is typically a large organization or a company which maintains the backend of the application. And when you access this web application, what happens is you open your browser typically and download some HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and which is what we call as a front end. So this front end is essentially a mini application that is running in your computer in your browser, and it interacts with the backend over a protocol called HTTP. So when we talk about web development as such, it can mean a whole spectrum of technologies, starting from the user interface, the front end of the application, like the APIs through which the front end communicates with the backend, as well as the backend which will usually store data in some database, manage the state, and like communicate the responses, handle all the business data, and communicate the responses back to the client side. So when I started out, like one of the client side, the front end ecosystem was not as mature, and most of the serious development to say happened in the backend. So you would typically start with some PHP or Python framework, and then build out the front end, build out the backend of the application, and then this backend will serve some dynamically generated HTML, and the browser will render it. So nowadays, the ecosystem has substantially evolved, and we have this plethora of technologies, both on the front end side, like things have evolved quite a bit. We have a lot of modern frameworks, and the the ease of development has also significantly improved. Like very good resources are available, very good frameworks are available, both for the front end and back end technologies. So JavaScript language itself that we use in the front end has matured substantially, and in the backend, of course, we have a much wider array of choices available. So we have this JVM platform. We have a lot of dynamic scripting languages which are easy to get into, like Python, PHP. So the ecosystem has evolved a lot, and it has been a great pleasure, like seeing the platform evolve.
Great. So I got an overview of what web development is. So how do you understand the project? What would be the steps involved in the web application development assets?
So one of the cool things about modern frameworks or the modern web platform is that pretty much every aspect of a running application, you can interact with it while it is running. So if I have some front end running in the browser, I can open the browser's dev tools and interact with the user interface of the application, and I can see what HTTP calls it is making, and what are the parameters it is sending to the backend, and what is the response that we are getting back from the server. So we are able to inspect and debug pretty much every aspect of the application. So that has been these tools have evolved quite a bit over the last few years. And so now when you set up an application, you would typically have a running dev server, and as and when you are making modifications to the application, you can see these changes appear in real time. So that makes developing and trying out features, or making changes and seeing what happens, much more easier in a present day world if you are using a modern technology stack.
Uh, Got it. So how does a project approaches you? And what would be the, yeah, so yeah, we are setting up the web server, we are planning on the resources. So as a web developer, what requirements will you be getting, and how will you approach those requirements?
So this depends on what is the kind of specialization you have. So, for example, if you are a web developer in a small company or a small team, you might be working across the stack, and you might be involved in building the user interface as well as the APIs which this user interface interacts with, as well as the backend which serves this API. So you might be working across the complete vertical and delivering a feature end to end. And it is also common that when you are in a larger company, you are dedicatedly focusing on a smaller aspect of the application. So you might be focused more on developing the user interface of the application itself, whereas the backend or the APIs might be handled by a different person or a different team completely. So when it comes to requirements, uh, first of all, it is most important to understand what we actually want the user experience to be. So this will be typically, you will have a story from your product manager, or sometimes you might be involved in the discussions with the clients as well, which is also a very interesting thing to be a part of. So the most important thing is to understand what we want to provide to the user, and how it fits into the user's workflow. So once we have that user-centric workflow in place, then we might have to think work back from there as to how this will translate into our the permanent storage system, or the which might be some SQL database or a NoSQL database, like where our data is storing. And once we have these two ends in place, we can basically fill in the blank, what goes in between. while building the interface, how will my user interface code will be structured, and how will my API be structured, and eventually how will the API handlers communicate with the backend, and how will the data be stored. So I think the most important thing is to start with the user story and then work backwards towards your infrastructure.
Understood. So, how do you determine the tech stack in that? I heard mean stack, you'll be choosing mean stacks, merge stacks, and a lot of
Mhm.
other stacks as well. So,
Yes.
how do you determine for a project, and how does that impacted your development career as well?
Mhm. So, before I answer, go into the details of this answer, the first thing I want to mention upfront is that there are a lot of online debates about technical stacks on whether we should be using Ruby or Python. So, at the end of the day, if you are just starting out with your career or just starting out with your project, the most important thing is to get productive quickly. So, these online debates are not that much not that useful for you right now. So if your team or your team members already have a very good expertise in a particular tech stack, like it is almost it is almost always a good idea to start prototyping on that technical stack first. Having said that, and also a lot of applications nowadays are polyglot applications. They are written the backend will be written in either some different language, or the backend itself will be a composite of multiple services. So perfect language upfront nowadays matters a lot less than it used to do, because we in the current modern cloud platforms and all, they have made it much easier for us to develop multiple services in different languages and basically glue them together as a unified services. So having said that, if you are selecting a language now and you want a good starting point, choosing mainstream languages is pretty much always a good idea. So JavaScript is an obvious choice when you are developing the front end, and in recent years, it has also become a good choice for backend development given the popularity of the Node.js ecosystem. And in addition, the JVM platform, especially the Java language and multiple other languages like Kotlin and Scala, which exist for the JVM, they remain a solid choice for backend development, because a lot of engineering effort over the last couple of decades have gone into making these platforms scalable and mature and performant. So, like so JVM remains a very solid choice for the backend. And additionally, a couple of new languages like Golang and Rust have become popular, and they have
Okay.
emerged as very good choices for front-end backend development. I'm sorry. So Golang is interesting. Both of these languages are interesting because compared to traditional solutions, your memory footprint is significantly less, and the ecosystem is still maturing in many aspects, but they have emerged as solid choices.
Right. Using multiple technology, you are telling about that point, right? Using
Mhm.
multiple technologies for a single application. So,
Mhm.
will that affect a user experience or a user interface, or the entire the application usability?
Mhm. So at the end of the day, your user doesn't care whether your application is written in PHP or whether it is being served by Django or it is being served by Ruby on Rails. The end user doesn't care. So there is something to always keep in mind. We are deeply attached to the technologies that we love, but it is very important to keep in mind that the end user almost never cares. But what is important is to provide a very good user experience to the end users. So there, certain technical choices become important in certain cases, because because your use cases differ vastly from use case to use case. So if you are developing something which is very real time, or if you are developing the next YouTube or something which requires a lot of interactivity like online games, then your backend should be something which can handle that kind of real time traffic. So they are Go and JVM are really good choices.
Okay. So, how important it is to become a full stack developer for someone who is just starting up?
Okay, this is something I was looking forward to. So even if an individual is not working on across the stack, like it is important to have an idea of what happens throughout the stack. Otherwise, it is very difficult for the team to optimize the entire application. Again, as I said, at the end of the day, the user experience is what matters most. So, as developers, like if we don't have visibility into what is happening in the backend, or like the kind of mindset that I am only concerned with this slice of the application and I don't really care what happens in the rest of the application. That mindset can hurt both the productivity of the team, the collaboration, as well as the performance of the application. So even if we are not working across the stack, we might be working just on the database side or just on the backend side. It is important to understand the needs of every aspect of the stack, and that is why I'm becoming that is why I believe being a full stack developer helps.
Okay, great. So, how does a MNC look at a web development project, and how does a very small startup look at a web application development project? What major differences do you see?
So there's an interesting question because one of the reasons why web platform itself has exploded in popularity over the last decade is because it is useful in so many different ways and so many different domains. So now,
Okay,
if we look at small startups, we it is common to have small, closely knit teams which are delivering features end to end. So it is fairly common for people to work on the backend as well as the user interface and deliver complete features in shorter sprints. In larger organizations, you would typically have multiple long-lived products and people who have deep experience in the domain of the application. And we would have development teams who will closely interact with these domain experts. And they
okay,
sometimes might be working in smaller teams and serving end-to-end features, and sometimes they would be specializing more on either the front end or in the back end. And this bridging this gap between the agility of smaller teams as well as the depth of experience which larger teams or people working on long-lived applications need, that has been an active area of exploration which I have been personally very interested in throughout my career. So modern innovations in the cloud platforms like serverless have made it much more easier nowadays. So you can have a large application as a composition of smaller services which interact with each other, and you can get a similar kind of agility as a small closely knit team would have.
okay. So, speaking of the methodologies we use for the software development process, how do anyone arrive at that? This is the methodology that we wanted to use for the application development. Apart from the clients, yes, the clients might be needing a particular methodology to development, but
Mhm.
if you have a chance to choose, this is a methodology that we have to choose for this particular application development. What would it be, and why?
So I think first and foremost, if I have a choice in the matter, I would like to optimize for continuous delivery, because one of the things which the internet as well as the cloud have made it very easy nowadays is you can rapidly iterate on features and deliver them to the clients. And delivering features rapidly to the end users, I think, is very important because you can get early feedback in that case. People can try out things and they can provide you feedback. So getting something upfront in front of users, that is the most important thing. So that is why I feel like adopting a sprint-oriented methodology, where after every sprint, is an incremental development over your existing application. That is, I believe, for a vast majority of cases, that is a very good approach to go with, because
Okay,
you never have a large rewrites are usually very costly. Like if you are working on a large application and you want to introduce a major change, then doing that in a traditional manner where you release software every 2 3 years, that is not practical in the current day and age, because your competitors are also working really hard to push out new features. And by the time you release in the at the end of 3 years, you might not even know how the market has transformed.
exactly. Uh, so, uh, right. So, if there is an existing product, so how
Mhm.
do you do the gap analysis if you start off? If you have to start off with a project which is already existing, or you have to replicate the product which is already existing with new set of additional features, as you said in the
Mhm.
earlier answer. So, how do you look at it, and what steps do you follow in that particular process?
So the first and foremost thing which I have found very useful is to like interact with the domain experts who have been involved
Okay.
in the product. So like as people who work with technologies, it is often like very easy to like dive into the code base and try it, like trying to find out what is happening. But I like in many cases, what are the decisions that have been taken in the past? Those the intent behind those decisions might not be obvious, like just looking at the code. And especially if this is a code base which has existed for like several years and multiple people have worked on it, then it is almost always better to understand the like what the like the applications are, like how the users are using that product, and how will their workflow change with the introduction of these features. So after
Okay.
that, I find it best to iterate it in a like small incremental cycles, and again involve the domain experts in like in every cycle.
Okay. Good. Uh, So, I see a lot of demand for Indian developers in the international market. What would be the reason for that? And can you give a heads up on that?
Mhm. So I think one of the one of the reasons is we have a lot of people who are coming out from very good like engineering colleges or other technology focused courses, and these people have first of all a good mathematical background and a deep passion for technology. And
Okay.
so I have a lot of faith in like smart people who are I have often been surprised when working with a team of juniors how rapidly they come up with solutions to complex problems. So it has been a like in my current position and my current company as well as the previous companies where I have worked on. So it has been a recurring thing for me to see a team of juniors or at points even like individuals digging into a complex problem and then coming up with innovative solutions. So I think this knack for figuring out innovative and out of the box solutions for problems, there is something I think gives Indians a bit of an edge in the market. And
Great. 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 That's really really true. So, really interested to know some of about your innovative solutions. So, what would be the favorite project which is close to your heart, which is developed by you and your team?
So, like over the last couple of years, I have worked on like projects in different domains. So, I will just briefly elaborate on a few projects which I have found to be very interesting. So,
Okay.
one was I was working for an educational company, and we were building learning solutions uh, for primary school kids. And this was really interesting in that like we had to understand like how the curriculum was structured and how to make this content very interesting and engaging to kids. So
Okay.
that was a very interesting initiative. And
Okay.
I so the project is called Splash Learn, and I was very enthusiastic about it. And also, in more recently, I have been collaborating on different financial applications, and we have been developing user interface components which are shared by different teams, and we have been collaborating on like optimizing these user interface components and discussing with people who are domain experts what their use cases are, and accordingly we have been updating these components, and that has also been a great learning experience and a very challenging experience because often like what we can do with web applications that has evolved like drastically over the last few years, and nowadays it is not uncommon for like people to have like open your web application in the morning and then keep interacting with it like throughout the day. And so,
Correct.
like optimizing these applications and digging into memory issues, performance issues, these have become like much more important nowadays. Because we, in the like old school web, like we would click on a link and the browser will refresh itself and you will get a clean state now. And nowadays that is not the case. We have like long-lived applications within the browser, and
Correct.
like keeping track of performance and memory, that has become like much more of a mandatory thing.
Correct. Uh, so yeah, speaking of rapid increase in the development, nowadays even the White Hat Junior has introduced. Even the kids have started learning and started developing their own applications. So, what would be the point? Can we see a student who is 12th standard and started developing a web application? What would be the advice you give to him? Uh, in short,
Okay. So the first advice is like don't get into technology like at a very early age just because like it has a very good market or your parents are telling you. But at the same time, technology itself is can be a very creative learning experience, and we have like really good projects to like which kids can start with. Like this MIT Scratch project is one good example, and things like processing.js, and these are um, like very good examples to start out with. And the Python language itself is a great language for beginners to like quickly get up to speed with like up to speed with programming. So I would strongly recommend people like who are new to programming to start out with interactive multimedia solutions like either processing or Scratch, uh, which focus less on the like performance and optimization and more on getting up to speed and getting something building like really quick. So
okay.
that kind of learning experience is much more engaging in like at least in my opinion, as compared to the traditional route of like learning about computer applications and then starting with a low level language like C or C++ and then gradually building up on top of that.
Okay. Right. So, what is the most challenging functionality that you have ever worked on, and you have cracked it like, oh wow, this is amazing functionality that is going to be out. So, what would be that?
So most of the challenges that I have been focused on addressing are around the performance and optimization space. So often, like as I mentioned before as well, so often we have encountered like memory usage issues or very hard to reproducible bugs in long-lived applications. And
Exactly.
in case of web applications, one particular challenge is like often part of your application, like especially the front end, runs in an environment that you can't completely control. So
Correct.
you might have developed a web application and then like push it out to consumers. You have tested it thoroughly end to end, but now the user who is accessing the application, they might be using it in a very old browser, or they might be on a very poor connectivity, or they might be on a network like a constrained device like Chrome OS or an older version of iPad. And when we are developing for an emerging market, we have to account for all these cases. So, like optimizing for all these scenarios ahead of time can sometimes become fairly challenging. And addressing these kind of cases has been a significant focus across my career.
Right. So, what career opportunities can anyone get from this domain?
Mhm. So, as I mentioned some time back, so web development has like a vast amount of potential. So often when we think of web applications, we think mostly of like of the websites like e-commerce sites like Flipkart or social network sites like Twitter, Facebook. So these are obviously applications of web technologies, but at the same time, web technologies are involved in many other aspects as well, which are not immediately obvious to us. So, for example, if you are Like if you are using any mobile applications, that mobile application might be interchanging data with some backend server, and that API is would typically be like a JSON API or an HTTP API, which is also being developed by a web developer. So all these, when you take into account all these cases, the number of opportunities are cover a vast spectrum. So that is pretty much all the industries, like right from e-commerce industry to gaming industry to the finance industry. So all the sectors have applications for web technologies, and it is both user interfaces like browser-based applications, as well as APIs which cater to mobile applications, as well as real-time services which power all these multiplayer games and everything. So I see a vast amount of potential, and given that the web technology has this enormous commitment to backward compatibility, and there are a lot of major industry players who are behind it, I don't see the web platform going away anytime soon. It has been rapidly evolving over the last several years, and I am very confident that it will continue to be a platform for software delivery and software development over the next couple of decades as well.
Great. So, uh, if you are looking for a career in web development, do visit tildahat.com. It's tildehat.com, and search for the plenty of active jobs in the web development and other related areas. The jobs are updated on nightly basis. By this, we come to the end of today's episode. Once again, thank you so much, Gaurav, for joining. And I really, really found this episode very, very informative. Hope our viewers has found it informative as well.
Thanks a lot, Pranav, and thank you everyone for listening to me.
Uh,
And if you
so
have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
yeah, so the endings of online meets are a tricky thing. So if you wanted to tell one line messages for all the developers, what would it be? And once you're finishing the sentence, I'll end the meet.
Always be coding and always be learning.
Great. Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank